Good afternoon. Welcome to Poet Poet with your host, Doug Holder, and my guest, poet Lynne Viti. How are you, Lynn?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Lynn has a new book out, a new book of poetry collection, The Walk to Cefalu. And, um, and we're going to talk to her about the book and also other things that's happening with her. So the first question would be and by the way, Lloyd Schwartz wrote about this book. Um, in the first very poem of The Walk to Cefalu, Lynne Viti both recollects her childhood and announces the MO. Beneath each tale, I sensed another, a true story, an alternative text, painful experience smoothed over. Telling that alternative story behind the story, the tender elegy beneath the smooth over surface. That's my job. In these engaging intelligence and touching poems, Vidi fulfills her admirable intentions. That's pretty good from a Pulitzer Prize winner, I would say.
Yes,
Um,
it was very generous.
yeah, so I'm sure he meant it. And let us say that one thing is what we have in common is that we're both on the board of directors of the New England Poetry Club, and that's been a recent development with you. I think you run the communications section, and
Part of it, yeah.
why did you join? What's your? I mean, how?
Well, I had a couple times come close to entering a contest, and this year I didn't enter a contest. Instead, I was looking at all the readings, and I thought I should just join. So once I joined, I don't know, the call came out, we need people to be on the board, and I thought, well, I have a lot of things on my schedule that are not that are involved that are what I call poetry adjacent activities, which means have you been busy writing poetry or have you been doing other things that are connected to poetry? But I also had a lot of other activities on my schedule. I retired a few years ago, and I
Yeah,
became
you taught at Wellesley, correct?
correct. And so I decided that it sounded like it would be more fun to be working on some kind of project for New England Poetry Club than some of these other things that were not involved with poetry at all that I made room. I quit one thing so I could add this, and doing social media seemed like a good fit for me. So that's what I'm doing with New England Poetry Club. And there's always plenty of stuff to do.
Yeah, we just announced the Victor Howes Prize for undergraduate writers,
Right, right,
and Old Manse and Fruitlands are events that are coming up.
right.
So yeah, we always have something. We hope you would join nepc.org. Anyway, that's enough about that. Let's get into the meat of the matters here. Um, Cefalo, Cefalù is in Sicily, right?
Right.
Uh,
And
eh,
this, the last section of the book has a long poem about a long trek on the last leg of what was a I think it was 7 or 8 day hike from the middle of Sicily that I did with my husband and 9 other people we had never met before. They were all British. There might have been one Scots person there. And we walked from Enna, which is sort of smack in the middle of Sicily, all the way to Cefalù, not in one day. But it was very challenging. I mean, we are not big hikers. We will go to the Blue Hills for a hike now and then, or one of the trustees of reservations, but we don't go on 8 mile, 9 mile, 10 mile
but
hikes. So that's what this was. And the last day we walked to Cefalù.
so tell me, you seem to have traveled the world a bit. You've been around the block, um, and you chose to write about this specific place. Why do you think? Why?
I think for me, the I've traveled a lot and I've certainly walked around places and I've taken trains and taken buses or coaches and even rented a car. But I had never literally learned about a country by walking it. And we did not walk on roads by and large. Occasionally we'd have to go on the asphalt for a half mile, but we walked on ancient drove roads. That just completely blew my mind. We were walking on these roads that had ruts on them because maybe a truck had gone up the road in the spring, and we were walking in May. It was still could be muddy in certain places, but mostly, who went on those roads? Cattle, horses. And these roads go back to, pre-Roman times. So that was a very interesting way to see the country. You would walk by people's houses, by their by their little gardens, by their where their dogs were, where their horses were, and into towns and stop and go to the local tiny little towns. Go to the local cafe where all the old guys, because most of the people who are in Sicily are old because all the young people have left to go get work elsewhere, are sitting around at 10 in the morning having their espresso and talking. And it was fascinating because usually you come to a town, you go to look at the cathedral or the church, you go to look at the tomb of some important saint, you go to look at some painting on the inside of a church, you get back in your car or on your bus or whatever, and you go to the next town, but you're really not absorbing it the same way. But we were walking every day.
Certainly different from the environs of Baltimore where you grew up.
Yes. Oh yes. I mean, I grew up in a steel town in those days.
Hmm.
Uh,
And you knew
no,
and you spotted Sam Cornish on the bus once,
that's
didn't
right.
you?
Well, no,
Yeah.
actually, I didn't. I spotted him at the Foghorn Cafe where
Oh,
my friends had hipped me to the fact that this guy was a really interesting poet. And I thought, poet in Baltimore? You mean like Edgar Allan Poe? And so I went, and yeah, that was my first encounter with Sam Cornish.
who was later the Boston poet laureate, first Boston.
Yeah.
Now, I was wondering where the germ of the idea for this book came. I mean, did you feel it was like a right time in your life to write this book,
No,
to collect
I,
these poems?
yeah, I think in part, a lot of the second, I would say, half of the book is it can be pretty dark because I was putting this together during lockdown at the beginning and very slowly because wasn't as productive as I normally am. And a lot of the poems in that, I originally had the poem much earlier in the collection. It was sort of in the middle. And there's something about the poem that to me was it's uplifting. It's sort of a pick me up after all the dark stuff. And my beta readers said to me, "You've got this poem in the wrong place. This should this should be the reader's reward for getting through some of that tough stuff." And I ditched a lot of the what I call the COVID poems. I had too many. It just wasn't going to. I didn't think it was going to
It
be.
was, one might say it was viral.
Oh yeah, it definitely was. And so the antidote, the vaccine, was to take this and another poem that is sort of precedes the final poem, which is about this pasta dish that my friend made that reminded us of one we'd had when we had been in Sicily. It was the last dinner we had with friends before we didn't go out and see anybody,
No.
before lockdown. I mean, it was the last time I was in someone else's house until, 2021 and vaccination.
Now, there's so much subtext in families, and you sort of search out for the subtext. Some people go with an unexamined life, but you choose not to. And this, did this collection give you a sense of clarification, maybe purging old ghosts? What?
Well, I think the problem is, and I sort of set it out in the opening poem, the one that Lloyd
Mm,
Schwartz had commented on in his blurb, that um, if you wait long enough, everybody who can tell you their side of a story is dead. So what are you going to do? You know, you might have heard something from your mother or your father or your grandmother, but as you get older, you kind of think, well, there's got to be more to the story than that person's version of it. But there's really no place to go unless there's some sort of artifact, a letter, a diary. Well, my family, we were not, my parents and their parents, that whole family, my aunts and uncles, nobody kept a diary. Nobody, my father kept a diary. It was like one of those facts of the day. I went to the market. I got a leg of lamb. The price is now $1.39 a pound. It's up. I mean, it was, the weather. It, there was nothing, it was reportorial, but it was not about his feelings or the way he sized up some situation. It was pure facts. It's like a ship's
Yeah.
log or something.
Yeah.
So, so I think, and this isn't the first time I've done this. In one of my chapbooks, I tried to reconstruct my mother's childhood and early adolescence, and I only had a little bit to go on. I did some actual research. I pulled up records. I pulled up records of my grandmother's divorce. I found out all kinds of family secrets, and I wrote about them. But here in this book, I couldn't always do that. So, as I said, I say when I read these, so I made it up. Working with what I had,
Well, poetry is fiction, right?
that's
Yeah.
right. I mean, that's why they call it poetic license. I had license to do it.
Now, I was going to say, it was interesting to me in your poem, Not Irish Enough,
Yeah.
because I had a similar thing where, being Jewish, I went back. I went to, my parents were superficial Jews, just as you were noting in the poem, there's a lot of just, the old Irish tropes and things like that. And they were superficial Jews, but I would see my relatives who grew up on the Lower East Side and see how rich the culture was, the Yiddish culture and all that. So I went back in graduate school and I wrote about Henry Roth, who wrote,
Oh, yeah.
Call It Sleep and the whole trilogy, because I wanted, and I was in tears. I wanted to find what my heritage was. My father tried to assimilate into society and really didn't want to wear the big J on his suit. So I'm saying to you seem to have the same experience going back, trying to discover the essence of Irishness and especially literary Irishness.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's sort of how I came to it. My grandmother, whose mother was from Ireland, um, was a devout Catholic, daily mass, and a woman who told very little about her previous life. She was a very quiet person, and by the time I met her, she was pretty old. And my other grandmother could tell stories all day long and very entertaining, but the Irish grandmother, not so much, and she was not demonstrative at all. My mother, who was not Irish and was not Catholic, would refer to people as cold Irish. She said she's cold Irish.
I heard a shanty Irish, but
Yeah, I know, cold, like just, not demonstrative about
her
her,
background.
yeah, about her feelings. I mean, she was just a mystery to me.
Mm.
So, yeah, but I think, I fell in love with Anglo-Irish literature when I was in college, and then in graduate school even more so. And I just loved it. And I, went to Ireland, and I, walked all around Dublin and did the walk that Stephen Dedalus does in Ulysses. And then I went out west. I went to Cork. I went to Galway. I went to, of course, ended up in Sligo and spent a lot of time there, and went to the Yates School for 2 weeks, which, you come home and that's all you want to read all the time. So that really stuck. And then when I was in graduate school at BC, there was plenty of opportunity to take courses in the Irish Renaissance. It was really excellent.
Now, I was reading the poem Jamaica Plain,
Hmm.
and I think we've all passed through Jamaica Plain at one point, like Somerville,
Right.
And it was about a love affair, almost like I've been in Boston since the early '70s when I was in college, and it sort of almost seems like a sort of iconic love affair, in Boston style. You know, you got the beer, you went out, you had a drink, and you had a lovely line, feeling of your hand from around my ribs, like you were pushing my heart upward. Can you tell me a bit about that poem and your remembrances of it?
This poem is actually about when I met my husband.
Okay.
And but it was a very interesting night. It was one of those enormous parties where you hear about there's a party, oh, there's a party. We were not that young. I mean, we were 30.
Mhm.
Oh, there's a party. And you don't know the person giving the party, and the person who's taking you to the party with her, your friend, doesn't know the person giving the party, but she knows someone who knows the people who are having the party. And it's a group house. A lot of people live there. They were artists. Um, they were sort of performing artists, and so it's kind of a crapshoot. You don't know, am I going to? It's going to be like really weird, and we're going to leave after 15 minutes, or what? And I met my husband there, and it was just magical, really, because I didn't want to go to the party. I wanted to go home.
Almost cinematic, isn't it? You know, going to the arts party. Yeah.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. And we parked really far away from the house. And JP, certain parts of it could be a little dicey in those
In
days.
the old days, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
before it got all gentrified. And so, yeah, that's actually what that story is. And actually,
Did you live in JP?
no, I
No,
did
he
not
never
live
did.
in
No.
JP. I actually lived in Brookline in a rent-controlled apartment, which was
Oh, those were good. Yeah,
just the
I had one
best.
in Cambridge. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Um,
great days. Yeah, so that's what that is. And there are a few in this section which are sort of how I met your father poems. Um,
right.
yeah, there are a lot of them. This whole section, they're not all, but most of them, and especially what I call the older people poems.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
Like, yes,
Now,
older people can still be in love.
that's true. That's true. Um, Now, I was going to ask you. I always ask people this question. Why should we read your book?
Well, because here's why. Because I try in my poetry to sort of speak in the vernacular. I mean, I've studied all kinds of poetry in graduate school and sort of informally after that. But, and I read a lot of contemporary poetry, a lot of which I like, a lot of which is hard work. Oh my God, you have to have a PhD in English and maybe like another PhD in something else, contemporary cultural studies, to be able to make sense of it. And that's not what my work is like. And I think my goal is really to be pretty plain spoken. I don't want people to have to do lots of background research, and I don't want to have to, when I'm reading these poems, whether it's to a library group or a school group or at a poetry reading, I don't want to have to give a long prologue where I say, in this poem, I'm using the metaphor of, yeah, I don't want to have to.
Yeah, right. I agree with you there. I'm a similar.
So the poem's on the page. Um, I hope you understand it. You should be able to. I don't have a lot of notes. Occasionally, very occasionally, I will have a clarifying note about something that I think is a little obscure. But I think most of them are narrative poems. Um, so they sort of tell a story. So if you like stories, you will like the book, because you will like to see these little stories in miniature, and you see the way the poems live next to each other in the collection. They're kind of an extended narrative. Um, so,
Right.
so I spent a lot of time, and I'm not the only poet who does this, kind of figuring out what order things should go in.
Well, it's interesting that you said that, because a lot of in fact, I had you know Lorraine Roses, who used to teach at Wellesley College.
I know her, yes.
Well, in Newton Adult Education, I was teaching a poetry class, and I said to her, "Well, you're this accomplished scholar and all this. I'm very flattered you're here, but what can I teach you?" And she said, "When you get your PhD, you just lose that knack for poetry. You become very analytical, and I'm trying to recapture that. Is that is true for you?
Well, I think I wrote a little poetry in college. I got quickly deflated by the literary magazine editors at my college who turned back my submissions to me with some very harsh comments, so I wouldn't show my work to anybody for a long time. Then, after I finished college and I was a high school teacher for several years, I went to Breadloaf as an auditor because I registered so late, probably. And there was a poet there, and I just went around looking for one of the sort of younger poets who would look at my stuff and give me feedback. And now, of course, I can't remember this guy's name. Richard Allen, Dick Allen.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
so I had my little folder. Those days you typed it up on a
Hmm.
typewriter. Then you had one copy. Then maybe you used carbon paper, so you'd have two.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember that.
and he looked at them, and he went through, and he was a teacher. He kind of made a lot of notes. He talked to me about them, suggested revisions, but he did so in a way that made me understand that I had something. I had to work on it, but I had something there. I really had probably put too much stock in these girls who were 2 years older than me who were running the lit mag at my college. So I think at that point I got more serious about writing, but I was very reluctant to submit. And then I got caught up in teaching. I finished my degree. I taught at BU, taught comp for a couple years at BU. Then I just kind of totally burned out and went to law school and practiced law for 15 years. So, and before I went back to teaching. So, and then I also had two babies right at the same time that I finished law school. So I had no time to do anything. So the writing had to wait. I
Hmm.
kept a journal all these years with fragments that I've been.
Certainly more in detail than your father or your grandfather.
Yeah, I don't say what anything costs at the supermarket. It's
You
yeah,
don't want to. It's too depressing.
yeah, right.
Um, you know. So let's. What do you want to read? And we still have time.
Well,
Maybe one or two poems.
yeah, I think I will read. I'm going to read, since you quoted liberally from the opening poem about looking for the understory. I won't read that. I want to read a poem that came out of a prompt that I got when I took a workshop with Martin Espada at the
Oh, I did 2 years ago. Yeah,
Joiner
yeah.
Institute a few years ago.
Yes, Joiner. Yeah.
He's, one of the prompts was write about the worst job you've ever had.
Hmm.
What was interesting is a lot of people came back with some pretty awful jobs, but a lot of people came back with jobs that started out sounding like they weren't that great, but you could tell that they really felt like they had gotten something out of it. Okay,
There you go.
so the exercise was called Dirty Secrets. So I just riffed on that and said, Dirty Secrets of Summer Help. Out in horse country where the Blue Book people lived, we worked the 4 to midnight in our polyester uniforms, black shoes with thick soles. We came in the back door, punched in with the year-rounders. Millie, Bessie, Queenie, real name, Queen Esther. Queenie showed us how to open the wine, offer the cork to the gentleman, pour a splash into the glass for tasting. He won't know beans, Queenie said. He'll act like he does. Just smile. The kitchen smelled of crab cakes and red snapper and stale food, the floor coated with it. Sometimes the waitresses and bussers slid, weighed down by metal trays of food. Lucille called Salad Girl, though she was as old as my mother, tall and slender like my mother, but carried something my mother did not, a deep scar on her right temple. I caught that bullet, Lucille said, but I was all right. She kicked the husband out. Over the years, the place went bankrupt, was revived, went bust again. Queenie went to Bible school. became a minister at the Free Will Baptist Church. The owner lives in Florida now, collects Social Security, sells crab cakes from a food truck.
And read us another that you like.
Okay. This one is called In Your Absence, I Am Wearing Your Hat. And a pair of old shorts I found in your closet, threads dangling from the disintegrating khaki fabric. I sleep on my back at night, careful not to disturb the pillow on your side of the bed. In the morning, I'm unpracticed at making coffee, stumbling through the task, forgetting the filter basket. Your hat, the one you bought for hiking hills in Sicily, fits me perfectly. I look like an Australian crocodile wrestler, or maybe the Marlboro Man, though your hat has a chin strap and a toggle. Vents above the brim let in the sweet morning air. Your hat smells like your soap and your shaving cream. When you come back, I'll happily surrender the hat, strands of my hair stuck fast to its woven fibers.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn, very much for being on Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer. Our next guest will be Tom Laughlin, November 8th, I believe it is, poet. Thanks again.
Thank you. This has been great. I appreciate it.